Welcome to Steve's Place. This Sunday night, 6 p.m. Pacific. And glad to see you all here again for another Sunday night. It's the last Sunday in 2024. Anyway, if you'd like to go to our website, just click on the QR code in the corner there, and that will take you right to it. In the meantime, let me tell you a little about what we do. We have a YouTube channel here. We have over 1,500 videos up there. And we're just shy of 20,000. We only need about 50 people to sign up for a subscription, which are free, and we'll hit our 20,000 for the year. So please, if you haven't subscribed, please go up there and subscribe, and become a subscriber. That will let you know every time we put a video up there. And to get to it, just go to our webpage, TeslaTech.info. The QR code leads you there. And then the big yellow box there, just hit TeslaTech Channel to take you to our channel. If you want to know what conference you want to see, we have a conference directory there on this yellow badge. And we also have a speaker directory if you know what speaker you want. But anyway, like I say, we're really growing fast. We have like hundreds of DVDs here. These conference DVDs are extremely important. Just seeing the past and tomorrow. A lot of these people have passed over to the other side, and this is the echoes of their lives and what they were working on, and it gives you a chance to maybe see how they saw things if you're working on the same project. Anyway, we also have an exclusive membership. It's like $9.99 a month. Gives you global access 24/7 anywhere in the world that you can get YouTube. You'll be able to see these videos that. So just go up there and join if you can. It's $9.99 a month. All the funds help us keep this stuff going, And then last year's conference, you go to our webpage, you'll see this little logo here. You click on that, and that will bring up the how-to page where you can order last year's DVD sets. It's $99 one-time fee. We also have T-shirts for sale up there. And you also have a donor button if you want to make a donation, which we really appreciate, and we cherish each and every gift, So, and that's what we got going on there. And I'd like to remind everyone to be sure you click on the thumbs up sign on the YouTube page if you like what we're doing, or you want to let other people know, hey, we got good material. Hit that, and it helps the search engines. Okay, now that we've got all that done, let me introduce our guest tonight. It's Bob Greenyer. And Bob is internationally known, okay? Or you could call him Mr. Code Fusion here. He's the embodiment of what a Code Fusion genius should look like. So, would you like to embellish that any more, Bob?
No, that's fine. Can you hear me? That would be good.
We hear you great.
Wonderful. Excellent. Yeah, so thank you, Steve, for allowing me to reach out to your audience. And I encourage my audience who are also watching on the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project's YouTube website that they look into Steve Ellswick's conference, TeslaTech. I think it's going to be held in August this year. Is that right?
Be August 6th to the 10th.
Next coming year, sorry.
Not quite there yet.
You're not quite yet there. Yeah, right. Yeah, so pending disaster, if I can get the support, then hopefully I will be there to share some thoughts in context with that conference. So I'm going to be talking through in this presentation some of the material that my audiences will know well, but also some stuff in context of Tesla specifically. And moreover, if people want to understand the work that I have done and the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project has done, go to the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project's YouTube channel at MFMP. And if you can, if you want to follow my own work, go to my my blog rather at I've got to remember it is now remoteview.icu, remoteview.icu, and there's a lot of material that I've been covering over the last 12 and a half years, nearly. It's a long time now, and it is sometimes people find it a little bit challenging to understand, but I have gone through in detail over the last, I think, 7 years in a sequence of presentations called O-Day, and into a lot of detail. And it's been a sort of heuristic process that's also taken on board new information and learning as we progressed, both from ancient history through reasonably contemporary scientific work and through actual experimentation and analysis. So during this process, I realized that we are not the most intelligent people that have ever lived, and that it's very clear that ancient societies had understood something about the way nature works and the natural order, which it would seem that Tesla had picked up upon. And we're going to look at that today. So my question today is, was Tesla seeing the natural order? So you have to bear with me. This is the first time I've done an actual presentation on StreamYard, so let's hope this works. Okay, so my current hypothesis for the process of low-energy nuclear reactions, which I have presented a couple of times now, is that the process involves multi-axis hydrodynamic shear in polar, that is, say, water, or charge-separated materials. And this leads to a thing called fractal electrodynamic structures, and these possess this thing that I call a fractal toroidal moment. This overall structure has a disruption zone, and it has areas of changed permittivity. In this overall structure, there is a point at various levels of its fractal nature where there are phase singularities, and these can utilize the Aharonhof-Bohm effect at those phase singularities, forcing material, even electrons, to become coherent. And this forms a magnetic core and magnetic subcores, and in the self-similar structures, and the actual electrons themselves must necessarily become a superconducting structure. When parts of this coherent matter that's formed at the core get to a density where they exceed their Schwarzschild radius, a black hole essentially is effectively formed. And I would argue that actually real black holes are not the three models that are mutually exclusive that astronomers talk about, but are actually this, and that in that core, matter is collapsed, and it can re-emerge as new matter when the overall electrodynamic structure fails, and it does this into a number of common elements. So I just did a Kickstarter for a remake of Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto's Steps to the Discovery of Electronuclear Collapse book. So thank you to all of those in the world that contributed to that. It was successful, and we reached our first stretch goal. We're close to the second stretch goal. If you did not participate, but you would like to help push that to the second stretch goal, you can go and look at Kickstarter and look for I think it's something like Understanding the Magic of Ball Lightning. But if you look up Matsumoto, you should find it. And whilst you can't get the bargain pledge values that the people that did when they were in the actual Kickstarter, that you can still get some of the rewards there and help push it over the second stretch goal. But essentially, in the preface of Matsumoto's book, he argues that structures that are similar to natural ball lightning, he calls them micro ball lightning, cause effectively a type of similar gravitational collapse as you get in a supernova, and this causes electronuclear collapse of matter and electronuclear regeneration. And he has this model in his book where you have this kind of toroidal implosion, explosion type structure, and it produces a wormhole, and out of that you get the generation of hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen. So with this process, you can actually do abiotic synthesis of oil and gas, and you can also produce these common elements like titanium and iron, as you see here. So I have a series of bibliography notes here that you should take down. If you're new to this, one is this replication of a 1970s laser into nonlinear plasma experiment that was done in Japan. This was published in Physics of Plasmas in 2021. The key point here is that on the toroidal plasma self-organized structure that is formed, you get, in this particular image with a single pulse of laser into this nonlinear plasma, you get this 1.36 thousand Tesla isomagnetic structure, which is the red ring, but also going into the core, the phase singularity, you also have that 1.36 thousand Tesla. Note we are using the term Tesla here. This is one of the few areas where Tesla is actually given credit for making the modern world. The other point is on the left of this diagram, you can see this kind of like blue and red area. That is looking at a close-up of one side of the torus structure. And if you look at the actual paper, you'll see that the charge separation here is 3.6 trillion volts per meter. And that, obviously, if you look at the scale, this thing is in the bottom left of the right-hand part of the diagram. You can see it's about 20 microns across. When you see this, it's still more than enough to polarize the vacuum, and the implications that that provides. Then there is this paper by Afanasyev and Dubovik, working at the Joint Institute of Nuclear Research in Dubna, north of Moscow. And it's called Some Remarkable Charge Current Configurations. And they point that the torus electrodynamic structure has at the center, as I said, the Aharonov bomb effect. And this allows some unique capabilities of these structures. One of which is proposed by this researcher called Wisniewski in 2008. And he talks about a Dirac-compliant topological monopole. This is not a elementary particle monopole like a proton or an electron is a charged elementary particle, but it is a topological composite particle. And as such, it uses this Aharonov bomb effect to pull in the electrons, which are out of phase and maybe of different energies, into a finite radius, which is non-zero. It actually has a radius, and they become coherent and form this current loop, the superconducting current loop, which has at its center a topological monopole at the phase singularity. This, I believe, is what is the basis for the awarded 2011 patent by Lockheed Martin Corporation, Systems and Methods for Generating Coherent Matter Wave Beams. They believe they form these coherent matter that is in the form of like buckyball structures. I would concur to a degree, although I think it's a little bit more interesting. I think it's a little bit of limited hangout that they've got here. But the formation, excuse me, of these structures is initiated by a point electrode discharge into some 10 micron chambers, which, along with the magnetic field and the Aharonov bomb effect, as it states in the document, they can cohere even electrons at any temperature to form this coherent matter wave beam. And it has some amazing properties. This is a real thing, and people need to wake up to the potentials. Okay, so I have this thing that I've coined fractal toroidal moment. After I coined it, I found that there was a paper published in a major mainstream journal that was talking about these electrodynamic structures that referred to them as fractal toroidal structures. So it's not an original idea in this context. It was original to me, but I'm always assuming that if I think of something, probably someone's thought of it before. However, in the West, they call them hypertoroidal, and in the former Soviet republics, they call it supertoroidal, but neither hyper nor super make any logical imagery in my mind, so I chose to call it fractal, and you'll see why in a minute. What can you do with these structures? Well, according to Zverblis and based on calculations done by a guy called Nevesky from the Russian Academy of Sciences in 1988, but published in 1993 in the Russian Electricity Journal, which is quoted by Zverblis in his 1995 paper, which you can see linked and translated in that remoteview.substack.com link. They are saying this is a fractal structure and that it produces a electromagnetic phantom, and that can capture vacuum oscillation photons, and indeed one could argue could capture any photons, which means it can effectively capture 0-point energy. The second point is that Freiberger in 2009, working at Stanford Linear Accelerator, and an expert in ball lightning, was charged with trying to explain some ball lightning structures, micro ball lightning structures that were forming in the National Lab in the early 2000s in a superconducting chamber, and called cavity lights, which they called them. And he did a similar extension to Maxwell electrodynamic equations and came up with what he called this diality angle and a vacuum current, which would be equivalent, in my view, to the Zverblis and Nevesky electromagnetic phantom. And he said that if this is energized to sufficient level, it could cause a critical transition due to the diality angle. It's all explained in the paper, which you can see the link there, funded by the US Department of Energy. And this would lead to the decay of baryons. So this would be electronuclear collapse, as observed by many authors, not just Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto, who was a nuclear scientist in Japan. Unfortunately, he passed away last year. So we have a capability here to both capture 0-point energy and capture energy from the decay of baryons. And so there's both the most energetic matter conversion process that you can possibly imagine in the form of the collapse of baryons in the bottom part there, and in the top part you have effectively unlimited energy connecting to the wheel work of nature. So what is the toroidal moment? Well, if you have an electric current going around in a loop, this will produce a magnetic moment. And if you rotate that 90 degrees, you will have a ring of these magnetic moments, and that does not produce a new electric field, as both is assumed by Nevesky and Freiberger. It actually produces what's called a toroidal moment. If you take that toroidal moment structure, which must necessarily have at least 2 magnetic loop and counter loop in it, in its poloidal sense, and then you rotate that toroidal moment and produce a ring of toroidal moments, that produces a second order toroidal moment, which here it is referred to in the Multi-Ferroic Materials 2015 article as a hypertoroidal. So this is what we call them in the West if you want to do your research on this actual phenomena of electrodynamics, which is not normally considered or taught. The first time I saw a structure of this was long before I learned of the nature of toroidal moment and so forth, in a nickel and diamond and deuterium experiment conducted by the late Neil Crichton Gold, called LION, in the copper oxide crust. I observed these kind of winged structures with this bit reaching down that was able to somehow fluidize copper oxide, which the overall thing was at lower than the temperature melting point of copper oxide, but it was somehow able to fluidize that and twist it over. In another experiment in Dr. Royshen Amarza's Amarza gas, which is a form of HHO on tungsten. This experiment you can see recorded live. It was just a few seconds long. It caused this structure on the right, and this, particularly the one on the left, actually, because that was in 2017. That alone, thinking about that, led me to draw what I called the basic yin-O structure in 4th of October 2018. But I actually, that's when I first published it, but it was early January in which I drew that structure. And so I thought there was kind of like a monopole-like structure, and matter was being pulled in a torsion field, and there was an overall toroidal which I've cut in half there. So that was my basic structure back at the January 2018. Then in other experiments, Suhas Ralkar in ultrasound in water in 2017 also, I saw these bubble structures. We end up developing by accident in California with my dear colleague Alan Goldwater, an experiment we called Ultra, and you can see examples of that in top center and bottom right, where it produces within very small amounts of time a yin-yang structure, which has a lower section, which you can see in the top center image, where you get the torsion going on and the depressurization, in my view, of the vacuum, or oversaturation of flux of ether through there, and it produces transmutation in the form of yang, that's destruction of matter, in the bottom right on the right hand side of the electromagnetic structure, and on the left it has the yin, which is the compression of matter. So this is all observed and repeated. In the top right, you see one of these structures formed in a Hank-Urien vagary experiment, and this is collided with a piece of fused quartz, and you can see the toroidal vortex coming down in the form of a caduceus and interacting with the fused quartz. In the bottom left, you can see the structure on the tungsten, which is transmuted. The area within the structure in the center of what is a magneto-hydrodynamic structure is synthesized elements. Most of the elements in our body and in the crust of the earth are there, in the most abundant elements, formed in seconds within this overall structure. And you can see in the center bottom that the core of this structure is exactly and precisely the yin-yang. How did I get to the fractal toroidal moment? It was from a John Hutchison sample that the project purchased, and I analyzed, and in early February, or the first half of February 2020, I saw 4 levels of this fractal toroidal structure, with the upper level having 48 sections. And you can see this in many presentations which I've spoken about, and you'll understand that this led me to this wheel within a wheel within a wheel structure. And this is the minimum third order structure. And you can imagine that it's XYZ, XYZ, all the way down, where one of those smaller rings in the overall structure there is self-similar to the upper ring of the structure. Now, these are the core tors. There is a range of event horizons that are around this structure, but this is the basic visualization that you can have in your head. Now, when we produce these in a plasma reactor, the Vega reactor, they can launch themselves into the fused quartz, and we see this presented, depending on the level of self-organization, as a 6-point structure, the boxed in the center upper part there. In the right top part, you can see a 4-point structure, which is exactly the auspicious symbol, otherwise known as swastik or salve stick, depending on its left or right or left orientation. And it was interesting. I visited the school. Obviously, Tesla was born in Smiljan, but he went to school in part of Croatia. And in the entrance to his school, over the doorway and down the sides, it has the salve stick, which is the female yin force. It's interesting to know that Tesla would have seen that every day as he went into his school. And on the top right there, you can see a multi-order structure. On the top left, there is a close-up, which is ordinarily a video, but I can't show you the video. But it is one of these impact marks where the structure has captured copper from the copper pipe in which it was formed, and it slammed that into the fused quartz, and it's left the overall electrodynamic structure, ball lightning, with its core and everything exactly and precisely at the correct places as per the magneto-hydrodynamic structure. So I then found the collapsed structures in the Henk-Uren Vega experiment, and you can see again in the bottom left we have something like 15 there. In the top center we have 32, and in the top right we have 1/4, which would make a 48 N-level Tor ring, which has substructures of 6 substructures in there. 6 is the flower of life. It is the first most stable structure, although the swastik or the auspicious symbol and its counter rotatory part is the first time that the structure becomes stable. In the bottom right, you can see just a 3-order substructure going on in that part of that ring. I have not seen any structure at the N level that has more than 48 substructures in it, and I believe there is a technical electrodynamic reason why that is, and I have spoken about and derived what that is. So I sent the sketch that I'd done in 2018, the structure that I derived in 2020, and the collapsed coherent matter structures that I had found in the Henk-Uren sample to some Russian colleagues who are participants in the annual cold nuclear transmutation and ball lightning conferences and other inter-year meetings. And they sent back this classified Soviet energetics research document that I referred to earlier. And it was actually Vladimir Mikhailovich that sent that to me without comment on the 1st of May 2020. And in there, they showed this current structure that I discussed earlier, which, whilst it's not described in that paper as a toroidal moment, they show the structure that actually leads to the fractal toroidal moment in there. So my description on the 17th February 2020 of the basic exotic vacuum object structure, to coin a phrase of Ken Shoulders, who studied also John Hutchison's work, it was repeated in this book, this paper from 1995. So like I say, very little is original thought. Where we did see incredible physical manifestation of this phenomena is in a Henk-Uren experiment, where on the video you can see a hemisphere forming on the iron, which is actually in the foreground, but you can't see it. It's actually, I've lifted it off. And after this hemisphere kind of went pop, there was a hemispherical cut out of the pure, essentially, copper pipe. And within a few microns of the cut area, there were self-similar structures that were trying to, what I call, join the Borg. And there were many examples of 2-order structures with a vortex going in, 3-order structures with a vortex, 4 where you get a square hole in a square hole, and that is because it's becoming stable, so it doesn't produce a tornadic vortex going in. It's still a vortex, but it's a focused beam, and this will be important when we look at Griffin-Brock's electrode later on. And then 5 and then 6. You can see in 6 in the center of that structure, it is really just a round hole. When you start to get to 8, there seems to be sort of substructures forming inside of the oval structure. So really 6 is optimal, and that leads you to understand why the flower of life is the flower of life. So a 4 structure here is represented, and I did this in a presentation on the 5th of March 2023 called O-Day Another Dimension. And this is where I revealed for the first time what I saw as the 3D structure that drives this overall process. And I just want to let people have a heads up that I spent yesterday in the National Vietnamese prehistory part of the National Museum here. And what I have to share from that is just utterly mind-bogglingly significant in terms of proving without any shadow of a doubt that this is how nature works, and that people thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago implicitly understood this. So what you see is the stable 4-4 structure. On the left, you see the minimum structure, which is a 2-2-2 structure, or it's got 2, and then so you have a wheel made of 2 wheels, and each of the 2 wheels has 2 wheels in it. So that's the minimum structure that becomes stable to produce a single closed Poynting vector vacuum current, and you can call it an electromagnetic phantom at its core. You can see that in this form, there are disruption beams that go out and penetrate through the blue sphere, which is the non-radiating boundary. And what that is there's an electrodynamic interference between these superconducting current structures oscillating, and they cancel at this non-radiating boundary, so that there's no electromagnetic waves emanating from it, but there is vector and scalar potentials. And so if you can manipulate the core of this structure, you could maybe change those vector and scalar potentials over time. And this leads to novel communication technologies and what some might call scalar waves. So this I've talked about is probably one of the most significant scientific documents of the ancient world. This, I think, is from the 4th century. It's where the Egyptian knowledge was combined with the emerging Christian knowledge, and this is a Coptic Christian stele, and you'll see there is the angel of death on the right, the Omega, and the angel of birth, the Alpha, on the left. One is slightly above the other. This is how it is actually observed in our physical experiments. The angel of death, the male force, the yang force is raised, and the yin force is lower down, and so forth. You see the vortex on the column is one way on the right, and the vortex on the left is to the left. I will show you this. I have already shown you this in a temple in southern India, but also I saw it in a temple entranceway in the National Museum of Taipei. It almost brings me to tears to know that how stupid the humans have become over such a long period of time. But this is the best representation I have seen in terms of showing the Sothic triangle going into the cores and the fractal nature. But of course, they've got to represent it in 2D. And so this is as good as it can be. And as I've showed, the 1775 design of the front door of the number 10 Downing Street is an exact copy essentially of this stele, which is in the Coptic Christian Museum in Egypt. And of course, Tesla was very, very interested in Egypt, and when you understand the Masonic order, you will know that they first asked people to understand the architecture and understandings and teachings of Egypt. The Chi-Rho, which was assigned to Jesus in form of Christ, you can see here in what they call the Thunderbolt coins of Macedonia. I think this one's from around about 350 BC, so about 2,370 years ago. And you can exactly see the wheel within a wheel within a wheel structure, and the double there represented here at the core of this thunderbolt. And the thunderbolt is the leader for lightning, and that is ball lightning. And so this is a ball lightning coin, and it's exactly and precisely showing the Chi-Rho. The Chi is the life force, and the Rho is the density with torsion. So the actual Greek for the two terms is exactly and precisely the physical structures and necessary to explain what you're seeing here. It's unnecessary to draw the full circles because what you're representing here is an overall tor that's made of two tors, which is made of two tors, which produces the flow through the center. So the level of precise understanding by the ancient Greeks on the Greek peninsula and the Macedonians is phenomenal. So I showed how the Great Pyramid of Egypt is exactly produced on this model in this presentation O'Day centered. In O'Day the follow-on presentation in the same evening from O'Day Another Dimension, where I revealed the 3D structure, I did a presentation called O'Day A New Dawn of an Old Age, where I showed in one of the closing slides that the non-radiating boundary on which you will see an ethereal glow is exactly presented in the 400 or 600 year, I think it's 400-year-old Masonic Lodge entranceway as you go into the Masonic Lodge in Venezia, in what is now modern day Italy. And so you will see this on your $1 note with the Eye of Providence in the center there, and that is also on that Masonic entrance, but you will see it in Masonic symbology. And essentially the knowledge was passed through the Coptic Christians, through the Masons, but also through the Orthodox Christians. And you may or may not be aware that Tesla's father was an Orthodox Christian priest, and so he should have known the knowledge. And so whether Tesla was realizing or not, he might have been taught a lot of what this process is and how it is a fundamental force of how the universe works. The Shak-Paranoff generator, I think, is relevant here to where I'm leading into some things that obviously Tesla had learned, whether he knew or not. And this is a Mobius strip with copper on both sides, treated in a specific way with electromagnetic waves, and then a pulse of high DIDT put through it. And because it's a Mobius strip, the electromagnetic forces cancel. You end up with a phase singularity in the same way you do in the fractal toroidal moment structures. And this produces your monopole. On the right, you have a zero albedo sphere at a distance. This is energy extraction. It's called single bath thermal extraction in the Lockheed Martin patent. And it's terrible, terrible weapon, but it can create fake UFOs and so forth. And that is pulling energy in. That is the yin force. On the left, you can see a luminous sphere with fractal subluminous structures around it. And that is a yang structure being produced by slightly different configuration of the Mobius strip, or the behavior of it when it finally manifested itself. Again, that can produce fake orbs in the sky when done with electromagnetics. And there's a lot of excitement about these kind of things. For those that don't know, my father showed me these kind of spheres, probably and almost certainly launched from the oldest custom-built airfield in the world at Shoreham in the UK, in Sussex, when I was 7 years old in 1979. This is not a new phenomenon, and it has been known by the Navy, at least in some countries, but definitely I know in 1979 these luminous controllable spheres in the sky could be created back in 1979 for a fact. So by studying various experiments like the Vega experiment, which I mentioned earlier on the bottom right there, the Lion experiment, so it's a Vega of Henk Uren, the Lion experiment by Neil Crichton Gold and John Hutchison materials in the left-hand images, and in the work of Suhas Ralkar in India, I noticed these torsional spiral things going on, which are also in Matsumoto's work, and these triangular structures. And this led me also to, clarify my thinking on the electrodynamics that is involved. What you're seeing is matter collapse and disappearance in these torsional structures. Now, how does this relate to Tesla? Well, obviously, he should have been interested, or his father would have been interested in the knowledge of ancient Egypt. And next to the Ankh, this is in my own photograph of Karnak, you can see typically the Ankh is associated with Sothic triangle. The Ankh below the loop is the key to all hidden knowledge. I believe it is exactly and precisely the topological monopole representation. And the Sothic triangle to the right, which is constructed from 2 pins 4 units apart and a string that is 22 units long, you have 2 9-unit lengths and 1 4-unit length. That's an approximation. In Jacques Paranov's work, which I showed earlier with the Mobius strip, he observed and described a conical structure going into the core of the Mobius strip. And I've drawn a representation of that from his work. You can see on the right, there's the golden triangle and the Sothic triangle in the middle. So these were my candidate triangle structures. And what I found was that the Sothic triangle, whilst it isn't perfect, and I've derived that more perfectly since, it is an approximation from a mason's carving point of view. You will see that it is related to Tesla's 1914 patent, which I have here on my shirt, if my camera will actually stay on me. There we go. So thank you to Carmen Miller, who gave me this shirt. So we're back in the room here. And those that have seen this presentation before will know that I showed that the angle of the Wardenclyffe Tower was exactly and precisely the Sothic triangle angle. But then you need to move that, because if I go back here, the notch that you see in the Sothic triangle is the area of disruption. I have since derived that most likely this is where the ether flow is so intense that it causes disruption of matter, and it can literally rip the ether dark matter through that into the core and energize it. So you need to take the Sothic triangle down, and it presents like this, which means that this Wardenclyffe Tower would have been extracting energy from within the Earth. And other investigations by both myself and Russian authors have found that oxygen its unique paramagnetic nature can aggregate these topological monopoles that are naturally occurring in the environment, which Tesla would have referred to as radiant energy. And the oxygen holding these topological monopoles in its paramagnetic nature can be dissolved into water. So if there was a flowing water under here, it would have been a continuous source of these natural etheric matter structures, which would have energized the overall Wardenclyffe Tower. And I've got a representation here where you can see that the Wardenclyffe Tower is exactly and precisely based on the magneto-hydrodynamic structure, which, by the way, has the first and second symbols of the Christian church, Chi Rho being Christ, the letters of the Greek alphabet, and the first symbol is the Vesica Pisces, which is in the center there. And the second one is the Chi Rho, which I showed on the Thunderbolt coin earlier. you can see that the Tesla logo here, the modern day Tesla logo, is an exact rip-off, and you'll see this in the next slide, but is exactly and precisely encoding the magneto-hydrodynamics, the central structures, and the golden ratio spiral that will form and is embedded into the Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower. You can see the point of destruction or harvesting is where the takeoff is at point D dash in the overall structure by Nikola Tesla. Just one thing to note is that the Sothic triangle here, where you will have this flow in a vortex coming in, does not go outside of the wooden structure, and it's necessarily wooden because it needs to be. If it was metal, it would cause a problem. It needs to be wood, so there are not free electrons to be easily disrupted. Okay, so what is the Tesla logo there, the modern day Tesla logo? It is this. It is on the human anatomy. It's that part of the human anatomy. We are made in the image of the technology that runs the universe. And this was bought in Helsinki. I bought this in Helsinki's National Museum in the prehistory part. This is a modern day version of what's called the Ukon Vasara, which is Thor's hammer, which is the part of the topological monopole structure where the spin gets inverted, and there is a change in the permittivity of the vacuum, which allows a lot of the magic that is able to be delivered by these processes. And you can see my photos here on the left and the right of Christianified 1600-year-old Ukon Vasaras cast into bronze. The older ones went down, as you can see, with the modern Tesla logo down to the bottom of the Vesica Pisces. And you have the double there, but otherwise, if you look at this, you can see that the modern Tesla logo, complete with the little lips that go into the golden ratio spiral of the 200 million year old ammonite that I got from Cornwall coast, or West Country coast in the Jurassic coast in the UK, is exactly and precisely represented on these Thor's hammers from Scandinavia, and even with the notch and the double lines. So the Tesla logo is an utter and complete rip-off of ancient iconography of the technology that runs the universe. So did Tesla know about this? Well, I would argue absolutely 100%, and because in his famous photo from the weapon to end all wars, as he called it, he had this flower pot in the background. Thank you to the person that sent me this. And he had particles coming up and going around in the center of the main level tour. And as you can see on the right in our physical experiments, the point of manipulation of matter, where metal starts to flow without actually being in a thermal fluid, this non-thermal process, is not within, it is within the white circles, but it's actually the little black circle, which is golden ratio out from that. This is where he cuts off the top of his Vesica Pisces flower of life structure. And it's exactly and precisely correct. You can also see that he has the vortex and anti-vortex represented below the Vesica Pisces, cut off Vesica Pisces, which is the Holy Grail. And you can see that one is above the other, exactly and precisely correct. He also has, as is represented in other Coptic Christian art, the life part of the circle of life on the lampshade. This was to describe his weapon to end all wars, which erected an invisible Chinese wall. And those words, I think, were specifically used because it was referring to Qi, and it literally is a Qi wall. So a ether vacuum bubble that is produced in this spherical structure where it is a different vacuum permittivity inside, and it is essentially a different universe where the speed of light and time is different. And this is why matter behaves incredibly different within this overall structure. And you can see in the bottom right, the iron, which was underneath the brass in the top right, it has exactly and precisely the copper laid down where it was shifted from one side through, fluidized on the backside without being melted, sent through a wormhole, and then splattered down on the iron on the right-hand side. These are physical things. I actually have it in my bag here. And it always amazes me how nature produces this exactly and precisely. So I think anyone paying attention with their own eyes to nature around them when they're not distracted by nonsense will have observed this phenomena. And with enough thinking, they will have realized how nature works. So the simple experiment, of course, Tesla was all about frequency. And sound effectively becomes phonons in matter at higher frequency. And then if you take phonons and put them into a piezoelectric material, that produces electromagnetic waves at the phonon frequency. You can see how all of these things are connected. And in this simple experiment, which you can go and look at, a presentation that I did here on the 28th of September 2022, we were able to establish that you can produce these yin-yang structures and synthesize matter rather trivially using a $35 ultrasound cavitation device and some aluminium foil. And this will lead to these tips of the vortex and anti-vortex becoming magnetic in aluminium, and ultimately these formation of these hollow iron-rich crenellated microspheres on which you have silicon dioxide on the outside. This is not our work. This is done by Metin R, and it shows how sound in water can produce these yin-yang, yin-yang, yin-yang structures, as you see on the right, and how you get to see the close-up here of the structure that is a two-order n-level Tor structure. That this is doing the work in sound, in the ether, in water, in charge-separated material like plasma, and in basically any type of fluid, as long as you can interact with the fluid some way, and electrons are a bridge when you create these fractal toroidal electrodynamic structures. So this is what the inner part of it looks like. I'm showing it here. Essentially, the basic magneto-hydrodynamic structure is a self-similar nested vortex whirlwind tornado. The whirlwind or tornado is the only thing in nature that allows for negentropy. If you do not have a tornado or a whirlwind involved in your idea about how to do this process, then it will not work. It's the only thing in nature. And the torus structure, the toroidal vortex structure, actually is born out of a minimum of 2 tornadoes. So the tornadoes is the fundamental structure, the whirlwind, that is able to produce negentropy, and it is in fact, in my view, the basis for all life. They need a minimum of 2 subtors, maximum of 48 at the sub levels, and it's replete with golden ratio and produces hollow spheres and collapses matter. Now, I'll say this for the first time openly here, so thank you to Steve for giving me this opportunity. Ken Shoulders established that you can have 1 ion to stabilize 100,000 electrons. And in fact, this was verified at Dubna between 2009 and 2018. So Ken Shoulders is right. This is the right ratio. So it's 1 ion for 10 to the 5 electrons. If you actually take 48 times 48 times 48, you actually end up with 10 to the 5. It's a little bit over. You can actually go, I think, 46, 47 or something. But if you just take the first 3-tier structure and you make them 48, then you end up with 10 to the 5, just a little bit over. I don't know whether this is the way, but I'm just saying it there, and I will do a short video on that. So you can see how the 2D structure of the O schematic there on the bottom right has relationships with the 3D structure. And it's very important when we look at Griffin-Brock's electrode in a minute that you see one of the vortices is going up and one of them is going down. And so the disruption beams will come out accordingly. And this would explain the observations of Griffin-Brock, and also the fractality, and building of the fractality does that. Here is a close-up on the substructure, and you can see that the substructure has substructures in it ad infinitum. Okay, so in this paper from my presentation that I gave on the 28th of September 2022, but taken from a Physical Review B discussion on axial hypertoroidal moment properties from 2014, you can see that they predict from calculation that depending on the particular phase parameters, they can end up with a vortex apple structure going one way or a vortex apple structure going the other way, represented as C and A respectively in the diagram on the right. This is due to megavolts per millimeter polarization. And in a ultrasound experiment in water by Greenyer and Huang, which produces excess energy and synthesizes new elements in Taipei, where I've been recently and working with him. You can see here is an example of one of these structures exactly and precisely represented as on the right, not in theoretical nanostructures for next generation communication or memory storage for your computers and phones, but actually as physically large tens of microns across structures, yin on the left with a yang and a yin, and a yang with a yin and a yang on the right. And these things are entangled together with magnetic flux tubes, both internally and between these two overall structures. These things are so powerful that they can rip into matter, but you can see one of them. And so these are two apples, effectively. They're the inner part of the electrodynamic structure, magneto-hydrodynamic structure. And you can see here on the right how I've overlaid the geometry, and you can see how precise nature is. There's no guesswork here. It's exactly this. You cannot improve upon this. You cannot patent this. You cannot make this any better. It is exactly what it is. And that's, if you try and change this in any way, it's going to be worse. Nature has the perfect answer, and it is one perfect answer. And this is how it manifests itself in millions of instances in just a short piece of material from Greenyer and Huang's reactor, and is the basis, in my view, for the excess heat and transmutation that he observes, as you will see. So this is the outer apple structure. This is one of the, depending on how much it is spun up, this is one of, and the reason is because it's an event horizon, because this is spun up to a degree where the substructures presenting their own non-radiating boundary cut into the material like this. So this is how it actually occurs. And I'll go into more detail about that in the future. But you can see it here. Now, using the same scale of 20 microns and just choosing a different area, you can see here that the inner sections, what I call the fat Oreos, are exactly and precisely correctly represented. So the apple in this case has broken away, and you've seen the internal structures here. And again, there's three internal structures here. There's one up there, and you can see actually it's lost the internal structure on the right-hand side in the top there, but you can see the core tore damage to the copper plate here. And so in this example from the DHX2 reactor, you can see the apple has crashed into the copper. It's buried itself into the copper, and some of the internal structures have come out and broken through the external sheath. So they are spun up to a higher degree than the external structures. The external structure fails first, and then the internal fractal subtores are able to come out because they are still operational. And so you can infer from this that the energy concentration is higher in the subtores than it is in the overall structure. And you can imagine in your mind how these things build up over time and fractally aggregate and build their abilities to do work. In this crashed structure, it's not immediately obvious until I overlay the sacred geometry structure, the magneto-hydrodynamic structure. You can see that the mouth of the screen here is exactly and precisely represented with this hole of consumed matter. Sorry. And that there is a golden ratio between the top of the apple and the center of the desynthesis and synthesis of matter in the center of the magnetic loop in the central tor, the n-level tor, and the point of destruction down the bottom. And I want to thank Tony Yaboni for first identifying this. Of course, since you know that this is fractal, that these golden ratios present themselves in this structure. It's absolutely replete with golden ratios, and this would explain the observed golden ratios that are in all of nature. Now, what you may not be obvious is that out of the weak point, when the overall structure collapsed, you have two n-1 structures down the bottom right, and the right-hand side of that n-1 structure has itself ruptured, and out of that you have two n-2 structures coming out. One, there's just the remaining footprint where it's embedded itself in the structure but later came away. Maybe it was still active, and the n-2 on the center right is still present. So this shows you again that the wheels that are within the wheels that are within the wheel are more powerful. So the smaller they get, and this is compliant with that 2021 paper in nonlinear plasma laser injection, where they say that the smaller the structure, the higher the intensity of the magnetic field goes up, and it's not linear. So the magnetic field in these small structures must be absolutely mind-blowing. And I think Lutz Jaetner calculated in 2019 at ICCF 22 that in a 5-micron structure, so the one that I showed you in that paper was 20 microns, but in the 5-micron structure, you are getting at the core something like 5 orders of magnitude more magnetic pressure than you get in our sun Sol, which would equate to that in the center of a pulsar. That is a form of a neutron star. So you're starting to align yourself with the work of Takaaki Matsumoto in that you're getting pressures to lead to supernovae and the synthesis of new matter. So one of the signatures of this process is what's called, what I call iron-rich crenellated microspheres. They form in what I call the small box and the smaller boxes, which are actually spheres. These are hollow, and they are the point of focus of the electrodynamic structures. And you can see here a blown up structure in a Henk-Uren experiment with the caduceus vortex highlighted there, going into the armor or the cup of the caduceus. The magnetic core that would have been sat there receiving matter from the caduceus is down in the bottom right, n-1 core there. And you can see an n-2 core that's come out of the substructure. And it always comes out at that golden ratio angle. It's really amazing how precise nature is. It's just totally amazing. It always comes out at that golden ratio angle. Okay, so that is the phase singularity I'm just highlighting there. Here is another one that's broken up, and you can see that around it, it has silicon dioxide, as we observed in the water experiments. And outside of that, you have calcium oxide. And so with iron oxide, which is in the core, silicon dioxide, and calcium oxide, you have almost all of the mass of the crust of the Earth. And so you can get an impression that maybe Earth-like bodies are formed from an overall large plasmoid core. And on the top right there, you'll see the spectrum from the only observed ball lightning spectrum that was published in Physical Review Letters about a decade ago. So in Adamenko's work, he saw iron-rich crenellated or iron-rich hollow spheres embedded into his pure copper electrodes from a pure copper target. And he argued in 2005 that the synthesized matter was produced in the hollow core and by way of dark matter. And the dark matter can be interacted with because the relic neutrinos, which are possibly as much as 5 times the mass of all baryonic matter, luminous plasmas, suns, everything, even black holes, that has a anapole moment, which is a special form of toroidal moment, special case, which is the same as an electron has. And so they can be pulled into that phase singularity also. Okay, so we have a cold fusion experiment by Me356, Thomas Jedrzejnik in Czech Republic here. He saw a crenellated sphere, although he did not have EDS, so he couldn't determine whether that was an iron-rich crenellated sphere. On the right, you see a hollow sphere, but also other spheres crenellated in a carbon in microwave plasma experiment that we did in August 2017 in George Eagley Dusty Fusion experiment. Here are some examples, again, of Alan Goldwater's ultrasonication of aluminium. You can see the hollow crust that is part of the shell from one sphere. You can see it's triangular, just like the triangular part that you see on the right-hand side. So notably, it has these crenellations that are slightly higher oxygen concentration and in sections on the outside. And then there's this pure homogeneous glassy inner section, and the ratio is the golden ratio between those two. And the subsections, in my view, they're actually microball lightning that are trying to bind onto the outside of the overall electrodynamic structure in the core. Here in Malcolm Bendel's Thor reactor, we see the same formation of these structures. Again, a hollow structure from Malcolm Bendel's reactor. This is in Huang's reactor. You can see these things are very shiny. This sample was given to me a long time after this reactor ran in water. These metal structures do not oxidize, even when they are just made of iron and oxygen. It's a special type of oxide of iron which does not appear to rust. And here is a close-up on one of the structures in the VCS5RT reactor of Bingjun Huang. Here is one of these structures. The ones on the right, which are less perfect, actually have some chromium content in them. When they're pure iron and oxygen, they are much more structured. Again, this had a breakaway, probably at the hollow hole end where matter is fed in, and there's toroidal substructures within there. So you can imagine that smaller structures that are being produced in the environment, like you see in ultrasound hydrodynamic experiments, they get pulled into the core, and with the compression and dark matter going in, that's where matter is effectively collapsed and resynthesized. Here in a Henk-Urine experiment, you can see the iron-rich crenellated spheres ejected two predominantly or largely titanium discs. They've emerged from it, but also as it was dying, it spewed out this predominantly carbon and oxygen material. In all of these experiments, you can't, with EDS, determine hydrogen, and hydrogen would be the first stable element synthesized out of the collapsed electronuclear matter, as per Adamenko's book, Controlled Nuclear Synthesis. And so if you get hydrogen and carbon as the predominant elements produced from this, then this would be the method by which you'd get abiogenesis of oil and gas, which would account for the deposits that are observed where there can never have been any biological material decayed under pressure. So here we go. This is a close-up. You can see the two tores that came out and emerged from here out of the pole. And you can see the titanium concentration. Titanium is fused carbon and oxygen in the ratio CO2. Here you can see in a Huang experiment, there is material being ejected, and this material is stellar synthesis, just as we observed in the other experiments. And you can see that the volume of this material is far in excess of that which could fit ordinarily into the core of this apple on the center right structure, and therefore we must assume therefore that the matter was coherent when it was in there, or it was in a electron nuclear macrocluster form, in that it does not represent as ordinary atoms. Here a apple structure has just broken. Two sides of it are either side of a vortical bundle of material that has been ejected, again with stellar synthesis type elements. Here is a Tesla type structure. In the video that I shared this, you can see that the overall apple has gone away and left these two cores within cores probably, and you can see the element proportions and locations on this, and the flow between one side and the other. It really is exactly and precise. There's no guessing about this. So this is where I come on to Griffin Brock. You can see my interview with Griffin Brock at the first link there, and a video discussed this material in much more detail with regard to his electrodes called unification there. But essentially, Griffin Brock, he did a replication of Tesla's shadow graphs, and in fact, I think he exceeded what Tesla ever did, because he used photographic film, which Griffin Brock did even to a better degree, in my view, replicating some and extending images of Nikola Tesla shadow graphs. But also Griffin has done using modern or relatively contemporary cameras and CRTs, live X-rays. But what happened was, how I got introduced to Griffin Brock was I was reading the book by Jerry Vassiliadis on Cold War technology, and I was reading the sections referring to Tesla's work on what he called radiant energy, which is effectively charge clusters. The Russians have determined this to be cold neutrino toroidal clusters, which is the hidden energy within matter. So you have electrons, the nucleus, which may be a proton in the case of hydrogen, and then this other toroidal cluster of relic neutrinos. If this has net electron, a negative charge, it's a negative exotic vacuum object. If it has no charge, it's a neutral exotic vacuum object. It's just a relic cluster of toroidal cluster of relic neutrinos. If it has net positive charge, it's a positive charge cluster. They are effectively in the charged form static electricity, and all of the things, doesn't matter whether you're talking about ectons, erzions, radiant energy, exotic vacuum objects, microball lightning, they are all manifestations of this same thing, either neutral or charged. And in Jerry Vassiliadis' book, he was referring to the fact that Tesla found that you could only get clean etheric matter from beryllium, magnesium, or aluminium. And so I suggested we tried to replicate this, and my friend and colleague David Bitlier went away and he found out about Griffin Brock, and he purchased one of his electrodes and started talking to me about it, and the fact that he saw this radiation at great distance in some of the detectors. And I said, oh, I need to see one of those electrodes in that desmatron, as he calls it. Because I think we might find that it is the same process going on. Well, you can go and look at that second presentation, unification, where I go into much more detail of what I'm going to show you now. But essentially, this is a 125 images. Grab this macro photography image of his electrode, and I could immediately see when I was just about to, I literally took it out of the package, went to put it under the electron microscope in Prague, and I could immediately see that it had the magneto-hydrodynamic vortex structure on there. You can see here presented in predominantly iron filaments, which are spectacular when you look at them up close. The magneto-hydrodynamic structure, as you can see, this is just stripped away the image and just showing you the actual SEM map, and you can see how every part of the magneto-hydrodynamic structure is precisely represented by flow patterns and by the different densities of these ferromagnetic strips that are on there. And it's just so wonderful to see this. So you can see that overlaid there. And when we looked at the core and the point at where we see matter being torn apart in the other experiments that we do under the SEM, we see a triangular iron section, and bleeding out of that we see the stellar synthesis of material, exactly as we see in our other experiments. And so my statement is that Tesla would have been transmuting matter at the same time as producing his etheric matter rays, his radiant energy. And I showed in this presentation additionally that there was likely 24 subtor structures on the left-hand side where you see most of the iron structures there. And when you go, as I said, above 3, you start to focus into a beam. And when you look at the X-rays, or rather X-ray-like images that are produced by Griffin Brock, even at 22 feet away, much farther than you can typically get any kind of resolving out of normal X-rays because they are diffuse. You can see where you have a cardboard box and you can see the actual internal cardboard structure. And that is because, in my view, as was observed by Vysotsky in cavitation water cutting tools and in other experiments in the Lena field, these are collimated beams. Collimated. This means they're like parallel. So they are coming out largely parallel. And it's a very focused beam. But what I believe is going on, and Tesla talks about this, or rather it's in Jerry Vasilaitis' book, that the beams persisted for a period of time after he ran the experiments. And I believe what's happening is you get this tightly focused collimated beam coming out in one direction. It can't go the other direction because one beam comes out one way and the other beam comes out the other way. So you just get this collimated beam. And what that does is like a Dyson air blade. It sucks in this dark matter and charge clusters from the ambient environment that then go in this beam in a collimated fashion. And so you actually get a wider beam than you are producing, although there will be a focus core, and this will travel for great distances in the neutral sense. And what's happening is it's partially absorbed by ordinary matter. And then what happens is, as it goes through the ordinary matter, some continues through to the X-ray film, or in this case, the 400 ASA black and white film, something like that. And this will be moved from the neutral form of these charge clusters, or rather what the Russians call magneto-hydrodynamics radiation, into the charged form because of the silver and the free electrons on the silver in the photographic material. That moves them from the neutral form into the charged form, the white form, and then they start to break up and shift electrons around and then expose the film. The same thing is occurring on a cathode ray tube on a sensor. So you've got a charge coupled device, it's charged, it's receiving the structures, they're getting excited, and we showed how these structures can be excited by sensors using the cosmic ray finder when I was observing these strange radiation emissions from a cavitation material from Suhasralkar from India. Okay, so everything lines up, and of course Tesla was using a phosphor that would be zinc sulfide that's activated with silver. So for the same reason, he would have observed this process going on. And in fact, Alexander Shishkin, who worked with Dubovik, who discovered the toroidal moment in 1965, he developed a screening, or rather a shielding technology based on silver activated zinc sulfide in, I think, 2011, 2012, to protect from this form of radiation, which, because it is neutrino clusters and has been found since the 1950s at least to cause the premature decay of beta isotopes, it therefore must be using the weak force, and therefore it must be neutrino-like structures that are condensed within these things. So that is what it is, and Griffin-Brock's electrode here absolutely categorically confirms what this type of radiation is. And I will say this now again, this is one for you, Steve, that we can use these beams, in my view, I'm saying this publicly so it cannot be patented. We can use these beams to force the decay of beta isotopes like strontium-90, yttrium-90, and cesium-137. So we can deal with radioactive wastes at a distance. And we can also potentially use these beams for forced transmutation to produce excess energy at a distance. And I wanted to discuss this with Griffin Brock, but since I did my presentation, he's been inundated with orders for his desmotron tubes. So that's great for Griffin, and I'm very happy for that, and he deserves that. I would like to work with Griffin to do a experiment which I believe would be realizable, probably with lithium fluoride, where we will be able to do low-energy nuclear reactions across the lecture theatre using this neutral radiation going into a thermocouple embedded into lithium fluoride vessel, and be able to turn on and off the excess heat at a distance. I think this will be the most mind-blowing demonstration of low-energy nuclear reactions that one could ever possibly imagine, switched and controlled. So this is my hypothesis, and I'd like to see if we can realize it together. So that's my challenge to you, Griffin, when you see this. I'd like to thank, above all of the people that I've worked with, my co-director of the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, Alan Goldwater. You can see in the background there some images that formed a presentation that I did called Flux Capacitor, where these are effectively flux capacitors. That is the case that they capture and aggregate magnetic flux within them, and you can do all of the magic that I've described and much more based on that. And I'd also like to thank these contributors and donors to the project. So that's all the contributors, the MFMP, all of the researchers and volunteers that have worked with the MFMP, my colleagues past and present, especially Matthew, Ryan, Alan, Henk and Show, supporters of my personal blog, where you can see all this information in much more detail with all of the references. You can go and dig into the real material that's behind this at remoteview.icu, and Charles, Stephen, Goran, all of the many donors, big and small. So I think that is it, Steve, if you're still there and haven't fallen asleep.
Yeah, I'm still here. But,
so do you have any questions?
So we're looking at comments, see if anyone has a question.
Okay, fire away.
But we are running a little late on time.
That's okay. I think I'm okay.
So I found a fascinating lecture. I'm glad you came on our program here, and I know everyone enjoyed it. You know, we had a huge count. But if no one
got 120 watching on the MFMP stream as well, so
yeah, it is pretty steady, you know. So okay, did you figure out the high energy peak on the gamma spec?
Did you figure out the high energy peak on the gamma spec? I'm not sure which experiment he's talking about. Oh, right. So yes, I think I know what he's talking about. So basically, with the observation by using a Griffin Brock desmotron by David Boutlier, we're using a Russian-made small scintillator handheld unit, and it was basically binning all of the energy at the high end and producing a huge spike, even at great distances. I think this is a phenomena that is based on the way that these charge clusters break up in the scintillator and how the electronics work. So it's to be determined what that is, but I suspect it's something to do with that, because you can see these fake gammas that this radiation produces, but they're not real gamma radiation.
Okay, what was the biggest challenge you had to face doing this research?
The biggest challenge, honestly, the community, the LENA community, because they actively came out. Well, firstly, they had basically stopped any publication in the community or comment about in the community of the work of Matsumoto when he mentioned ball lightning in 1993. And they removed all of Ken Shoulder's work from the LENA-CANA database when he mentioned ball lightning in the early 2000s. So I never heard of either of these two individuals, these great scientists that both are now sadly passed, Ken in 2013 and Dr. Matsumoto last year, who I actually fortunately met. And I believe it's because they mentioned ball lightning, and ball lightning is the key. It's absolutely the key from prehistory. Everything I see in the museum yesterday, everything I see in the National Museum in Taipei, everything you can see from that's been raped and pillaged from around the world in the British Museum, it all points to this knowledge. And it's there in the Masonic imagery. It's there in the religious imagery of most of the major religions on Earth. So it's the biggest secret, and Tesla clearly should have known it if he was paying attention at all to his father or to nature. He would have worked it out, and it's the same answer in any point in the universe.
Okay, here's one. Can you tell us more about the Rhodes channel?
Yeah, so this guy, Chris, he's been following my work for about a year, and he decided to take a sabbatical and do a road trip around Australia and explore the science. So I decoded the Sator rotor square, which was originally considered the Templar magic square, and it was also considered a Christian symbol because it spells Paternoster twice and has Alpha and Omega in it. But actually, it was found, I think, in 60 AD or 40 AD, something like that, buried in Pompeii, but from an earlier earthquake that occurred in Pompeii, and therefore it cannot be a Christian symbol. And so I will talk about where that originally came from, but it came from a person that came from Spain, and people will probably be able to work this out. Was under the because of health, I think he went to live with his uncle or something, who was the governor of Egypt around 2,000 years ago. That person died because of a water spout, which is a form of tornado coming back from Egypt. And so he, in his last dying years where he was living, which was near Pompeii, I believe he is the person behind the Rotas Sator square, which is based on knowledge that he would have learned more than 2,000 years ago from the ancient works in Egypt. And it translates effectively in the Latin as the divine creator repeatedly from Alpha to Omega comprehends and works with whirlwinds. And it's the most specific representation of precise understanding of how the universe works. And it's not a surprise to me that this was adopted by the Christian church and by the Templar orders. It is a basis of the Holy Grail. And so I've derived it from physical observation before I ever got to any what I call a little bit crazy. And he is exploring some of the experiments and finding the same things as everyone will do. Is this the non-ionizing radiation Sal Pai talks about? It's certainly neutrino radiation will be fundamental to everything that Sal Pai claims. I think one of the most important videos you can go and see is by Boyd Bushman, the guy that invented the Stinger missile, worked at Lockheed Martin. In one single presentation shortly before he passed on, when people tend to get very honest, he talked about the fact that Lockheed Martin are working on an energy source that's way, way beyond nuclear. He then refers to effectively his anti-gravity experiments with two bucking magnets being dropped off a multi-story building. He then connects that to the John Hutchison effect, which is where exonic vacuum objects and Ken Shoulders' work came from. And then he connects those all in that same video to the neutrino verse. And the neutrino verse is the relic neutrino verse, which I referred to in my presentation. And this is what enables this exact magic that is going on in my view. It is dark matter. It's dark matter that's accepted. It is a model of gravity, according to Bob McElrath, I think in a 2008 CERN Theory Group paper, which is compliant with the standard model.
Okay, well, I'm going to call it a night here, Bob, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. It's been a real pleasure.
I want to remind everyone that we do have a membership for $9.99, but if at all possible, just subscribe. It's like free for subscriptions, and we try to put a couple of DVDs up every week. So there's always new material going up there. And I remind you that we have our TeslaTech from last year, and hopefully you guys can come this year. It's going to be August 6th to 10th, 6th to August 10th in Albuquerque. We're locking down a site here, hopefully in the next week or two, and at that time we'll be opening up full-scale signups in that. And Bob, I hope you come.
I hope so too. I mean, like obviously Tesla, whether he spent his early years looking into nature and studying nature greatly, and his father was the exact right denomination of person to have understood and been taught and carried this information from the ancient world. So, and the fact that basically his technology is all based around this fundamental force of nature. There's no way he could not have known it. And he was saying in that 1930s or 40s image or whatever it was, where he has it in the background. He says, look, here you go. Someone's going to work this out in the future and they're going to know that I knew.
and maybe in addition to you, we might be able to get Griffin there.
I would love to have Griffin there. I would also love to do this proposed low energy nuclear reaction experiment at a distance, or some of the other ideas that I have. I've already asked him to get some beta isotopes and try testing the remediation at a distance, and that's a simple experiment. I think he's probably already underway with that, because he said he had some cobalt-60, which is probably the best target.
And if you go, you have a lot of good people there. I think Crypto Chemist will be there.
Oh, awesome. Excellent.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll talk to you all next week and everything. And thank you for being here. And with that, I'm going to call it a night. And thank you all for coming. And I hope to see you again next week. Thank you.
Thanks.